Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you all again today. And I want to say welcome to our Azure series with Paul Oberefo. My name is Olive Okapu, and I'm a cloud computing engineer. So today we'll be looking at something very interesting, something that without it, most resources won't function properly. And I'll be talking about the introduction, the basics of the particular topic I'm going to be talking about today, which is Introduction to Azure Virtual Networking. Understanding the key components of Azure Virtual Networking. So first of all, before I dive into Azure Virtual Networking, let's try to imagine why Azure had to create or had to develop something called virtual networking. Because without this particular service by Azure, I believe most resources on Azure or Azure won't even be like a thing or won't be something that everyone uses today. Before going into Azure Virtual Network, I want to talk about a resource group. Because before we go into our practicals, before creating the Azure Virtual Network on Azure, we'll have to create a resource group. So before doing that, I want each and every one of us to know what a resource group is. So a resource group is a logical container in Azure that holds related resources like VMs, networks, and storage. So I want to use an example. I feel like ladies will relate more to the example I'm using. So most ladies have a makeup bag, and in that makeup bag they have their lip liner, they have their lip gloss, they have lipstick, different colors, their brown powder, everything they will need to make them look very beautiful. They package it in that particular box or that particular bag. So whatever they need, they just go to the bag, open it, and get it. Because without that bag or that box, everything will be scattered around, and they might end up looking for their eye pencil, their eyeliner, or whatever, their eyeshadow. They might end up looking for it. So let's just say Azure Resource Group holds every resource created on Azure. So it helps manage, monitor, and apply policies to resources collectively. It enables role-based access control, RBAC, and cost tracking. So what do I mean by it enables role-based access control? So using a resource group, you can assign role-based access permissions. That's at the resource group level rather. So users can only manage the resources in that group without affecting others. So you can control who accesses that resource group. So if you want to create a resource group, resources rather specifically for a department, you can add each resource on all resources in a particular resource group and assign access to people in that particular department so they can access the resource group. Also, it's used for cost tracking. When I say cost tracking, it makes it easier to track costs for a particular project since all the resources you have created are in the group. And by doing this, you'll be able to know, okay, this resource group, okay, it's for finance department. Let's calculate or let's see how much these resources or the resource group in total has consumed over like the past month or the past 2 months or it depends on the duration you want to check. That's why a resource group is very important because it's used for organization of your resources. Instead of creating different resources just scattered everywhere, the resource group is very important. That's why even if once you want to create anything like this virtual network, if you are creating the virtual network, you'll be asked to impute the resource group you want to create the virtual network in. Okay, so now what is Azure Virtual Network? Azure Virtual Network is a private, isolated network in Azure that mimics a traditional on-premises network. So I would say it emulates a physical networking structure. So we all know that in our different organizations physically how networking is being structured. So virtual network is like an emulation of physical networking. So it enables secure communication between Azure resources, and it supports hybrid connectivity with on-premises network via VPN or express routes for easy understanding. This virtual network causes resources to stick together. I'll put it that way. It causes resources to stick together. So a virtual network is your logical isolation within your Azure environment. Okay, it is used to connect resources to one another. So I'll also say it's an entry point or a gateway to whatever you want to do on Azure. It's like an entry point. You must have a virtual network before creating every other service on Azure, every other resource on Azure. As one of my teachers will say, Azure Virtual Network is a bloodline. So if you know how important blood is you will know that, okay, the Azure Virtual Network is very important, because without blood, you won't be here today. Without blood, I won't be here to speaking. So this network is hooked to a single region. So when you're creating the Azure Virtual Network on the Azure portal, you'll be asked to impute a region that you will need to create the VNet in. What is a region? A region is a set of data centers deployed with a specific geographic area connected through a dedicated low latency network. So regions are, let's say, the foundation of how Azure organizes and delivers its cloud services. Each region represents a physical area in the world. So if you want to select region, you see a lot of regions: West Europe, Canada, Central, South Africa, North. So each of this region represents a physical area in the world. And a region contains one or more data center. And that will be used to provide redundancy and scalability in Azure generally, or for your resources. So this region is actually very important, because as you're selecting a region, you have to select a region that is close to wherever you live or close to your area for latency. Setting up a virtual network. So we have the steps to create a virtual network. We'll be going over to Azure portal to create our first virtual network. So go to the Azure portal, create a resource, go to create a resource, virtual network. Then you define the name, its address space with CIDR block. So this CIDR is the slash 16. So the slash there, it helps us to conserve our IP addresses, like divide to subnet IP addresses, and it's very scalable and efficient. So we impute the region, the resource group, add subnets to segment the network. Now, about subnets, what is subnets? So a subnet is a smaller segmented parts of a larger network. That's why it's called subnet. So I would say it's a sub network. It's a way to divide a network into manageable pieces. In Azure, a subnet allows you to organize, to secure, and control traffic between resources. So here it says subnet divides a VNet into smaller address spaces. So let's see virtual network as a building. Then let's see subnets as a room in that building. So when you enter like a tall building, like a duplex, for example, you open, you enter, there are different rooms, but you can't just enter and say, okay, you have access to all rooms. So a subnet is those rooms, and a virtual network is the building itself. So each subnet can host different types of resources. So when I say each subnet can host different types of resources, what do I mean? As I said earlier, a subnet is a segment of your network, and you can assign different kinds of resources to different subnets depending on their purpose. So now I can create subnet 1, and I'll use it to host web servers. I can create subnet 2, and I'll use it to host application servers. Just like that, I can create subnet 3, and I'll use it to host databases. Although when it's practical, I'll show you other kinds of subnets that you can divide the network into. So also it helps enforce security boundaries and control traffic flow. So by dividing your network into subnets, you can control the access now to that subnet, or who talks to whom. So now, like I mentioned earlier, network as a whole is a building. The subnets is the rooms in that building. So before you enter a room, you have to get your access, maybe a key. So that key represents the security boundaries that subnet gives. So when you divide your network into subnets, you can set your network security group, you can set your application security group. So these groups, you attach a rule to a subnet to allow or block traffic to that particular subnet. So now we're talking about the subnet purpose. So these are the other kinds of subnet that you can create. So you can create an Azure Bastion subnet. So what do I mean by Azure Bastion? I'll be touching this little so that you just understand like the surface meaning of each of them. However, in our subsequent classes, we'll be talking or dwelling more on them. So Azure Bastion is basically it secures RDP and SSH access to VMs without public IP. So in order to access or connect to your virtual machines, you will not need a public IP because it enables secure connection. So this RDP now is basically to connect to Windows machines or Windows servers, and this SSH is for Linux, Unix, and Mac OS machines. So for RDP, it uses ports 3389. While for the SSH, you use port 22. Then Azure Firewall. Azure Firewall, centralized traffic filtering and logging. So this gives the ability to filter traffic or access. When I say traffic, I mean it filters any unwanted traffic. It's a gatekeeper for your virtual network environments. It's there to block out every unwanted traffic. So we can, if we are creating a firewall, we require to create a subnet for it, that, and you see Azure Firewall subnet. Then forced tunneling, it's also part of the firewall. So it was a technique in Azure that forces all outbound internet traffic from your virtual network to go through an on-premises firewall or network appliances instead of going directly to the internet from Azure. So why is this forced tunneling used? It's used to inspect and secure internet-bound traffic, and it complies with corporate network policies. So it redirects outbound traffic. Then for virtual network gateway, it's used to provide secure connectivity between your Azure VNets and other networks. So when I say other networks, it can be your on-premises network. And please remember that when in our first class about cloud computing, I mentioned on-prem. And whenever I say on-premises, I mean your physical infrastructure, your physical network, physical setup, your data center. So this virtual network gateway, it enables VPN, that's a virtual private network, or express routes connectivity to on-premises network. So route server, what do I mean by route server? A route server is a service that simplifies dynamic routing between your Azure virtual network and network appliances. So it's basically, it does the work of like a router, but this time it does dynamic routing between your Azure virtual network and network appliances. So you don't have to, for this route server, you don't have to manually update your route tables in Azure. Like every time a route changes, you don't have to update it manually because the route server automatically shares routes dynamically using the border gateway protocol, which is BGP. So BGP is the protocol that routers use to exchange routing information between different network, especially on the internet or between cloud and on-premises network. So this is a summary of everything I've said from the beginning. So resource groups organize your resources, your infrastructure. Virtual networks are the backbone of Azure networking. Subnets enable segmentation and service isolation. Then Azure services like Bastion, Firewall, and Gateway enhance security and connectivity. So right now we'll be going to Azure for a practical. We'll be creating our first source group and virtual network. This is our Azure environment. So firstly, just like I mentioned earlier, we'll be creating the resource group first of all, because so that we want our resources to be organized. We want it to be in a particular resource group. So go over to resource group. So we have some existing resource groups, but we'll be creating a new resource group. But please know that even without creating your resource group separately, we can also create it. If we had gone into creating the virtual network straight up, we see an option there to create a resource group or use your existing resource group. But I just want us to see how a resource group is created. That's why I came here straight. This is our subscription. Then your resource group name. We'll be giving it resource group VNet test, since it's a test. Then what region do we want to place this in? Just like I stated earlier, we'll be going with the South Africa North region. Just depending on your location and also your discretion, depending on the source you are creating. Because some of these regions don't offer some services. So we just need to know the exact region we are selecting, the services that's available in that region before selecting a particular region. Okay, it was actually the first. Then we'll click on next. So for tags are actually very important in when creating your resources, depending. So now we are actually doing a test, so I might not impute any tag, but generally when creating a resource group, like maybe when in a production environment and you're creating a resource group, you will need to impute your tag. So tags are used to organize and manage resources more effectively by assigning key values. Like you can see a name and a value. For example, you're creating like an application for the HR department. You can give your tags. The name will be department, then the value will be HR. So they're like labels. Tags are like labels you attach to an Azure resource to help you identify and organize them. Since this is a test, we're going to be skipping the part for tags. So I'll click on next, then review and create our resource group. Okay, so here we have our resource group, which have been created. So now that we have our resource group, so there are two ways you can create your virtual network. You can create it from the resource group created. You can just come here in the resource group. Remember, we named our resource group Azure VNet test. So you click on create. When you click on create, then you search here for virtual network. Okay, then you create from here. And also, you can just come here. I'll show you another way we can do this. You can just come to the search bar, search for virtual network. You click on it and you create. So we have two existing virtual network, but we want to create another one. So click on create, and it also brings out the same thing. That one. The only difference is in the resource group area, that one we created will show here instead of this, because here we'll have to select the one we created, which is Azure VNet test. So to create your virtual network, it will require a name, which we are going to be imputing. Test. So it automatically picks the same region assigned to the resource group. Then click on next. So this is the security. So enhance the security of your virtual network with these additional paid security services. So we have the virtual network encryption. Enable virtual network encryption to encrypt traffic traveling within the virtual network. Virtual machines must have accelerated networking enabled. Traffic to public IP addresses is not encrypted. So this is just saying that for this virtual network encryption, if you want it, get the service so that whenever your data is traveling or it's traveling from maybe one network to another, or from one virtual machine or from one resource to another, you be best assured that it's encrypted. There's the security is higher. And for the Azure Bastion, as I explained earlier, it's a secure RDP SSH connectivity to your virtual machines over transport layer socket TLS. When you connect via Azure Bastion, your virtual machines do not need a public IP. You can enable it here if you want to. Then your Azure Firewall. Azure Firewall is a managed cloud-based network security service that protects your Azure virtual network resources, filters unwanted traffic. Then we have the Azure DDoS network protection. So what do I mean by DDoS? That's distributed denial of service. And that's a very dangerous way of attacking your resources. So all these cyber or threat actors, they can simulate your traffic to your resources, like trying to sign into your resources. This Azure DDoS network protection protects your traffic from this kind of attack. Please note that whenever you want to create this, it and also Azure Bastion, they're actually very expensive. So if you're creating it for a test, like maybe you want to particularize creating it, I will advise you maybe delete it after you have used it, because it's actually very expensive. So, but for me, since this is a test, I'm not going to select any of them. So I'll just click on the next. Then here we have our IP address and subnet. So configure your virtual network address space with the IPv4 and IPv6 addresses and subnets you need. Now define the address space of your virtual network with one or more IPv4. Now, talking about networking and subnetting, okay, there was a class we had previously before this one. Please, I want us to, in case you missed the class, I want us to rewatch in case so that you can know and understand this networking and subnetting better. So define the address space of your virtual network with one or more IPv4 or IPv6 address ranges. Create subnets to segment the virtual network address space into smaller ranges for use by your applications. When you deploy resources into a subnet, Azure assigns the resource an IP address from the subnets. So here you can see the address space created for you, which is 10.0.0.0/10. 16, which is this is a class A IP address, and this last 16 equals when submitted equals to 65,536 addresses. So you can actually edit it from here depending on what you're trying to achieve. So this default address too, it's usually created, the default subnet is usually created once you create a virtual network, a default subnet follows it, but you can edit it by maybe cleaning out the default and giving it the name, your preferred name. Also, I'll be taking us to subnets after creation, where you can choose. You can also do it from here. You can do it from here, but okay, you can change the name from here, or you can leave it at default, but I can change it to test subnet. Then depending, like I mentioned earlier, depending on the resource you are creating, for example, see the Azure Bastion we mentioned, the Azure Firewall subnet, the Firewall Management First Tunneling subnet we spoke about earlier, then the Virtual Network Gateway subnet, and the Route Server subnet we spoke about earlier. So depending on the resource you're creating and what you want to achieve, the purpose, that's why it's called subnet purpose. So depending on the your purpose for creating that resource rather, you can come here and select if it's you're trying to achieve maybe a VPN connection, you can select your virtual network, the network gateway. So, but I'll just leave it at the default, then save. You can see that the name has changed from default to test default. So I'll be clicking on next. Then for tags are actually important in the production environment, but since it's a test environment, I'm going to leave this. Then I create, review, and create. You can review everything. If you want to be sure of what you selected, you can review them. See the resource group name, the name given, the region, disabled for the security, then the address space given, and the subnet. Then you click on create.
Our virtual network has been created. So we can go to deployment details and get more information. Then you go to operation details. Then here you can see the operation ID, operation name, provisioning operation, which is create, provisioning states, which is succeeded, then the timestamp, that's the time you initiated this deployment, and your duration. So this took about 11 seconds to create. So the tracking ID and other information that you will need, your resource and deployment correlation, resource ID and type. So now let's go straight into our virtual network. Go to resource.
Okay, so this is our virtual network. Here we can see this is the overview. We can see everything, the resource group, the address space. Now we have one subnet, which is the default subnet that's automatically created with our virtual network. We have our location, which is our region, the subscription ID, virtual network ID. Then this is the capabilities, that's the DDoS protection we spoke about, Azure Firewall, peering. Now VNet peering is having two different virtual networks, but we can pair them so that the resources, let's say location A is in a different region, location B is in a different region, and they have devices. So VNet pairing is what makes the two virtual networks in different regions communicate. So we have our Microsoft Defender for Clouds that strengthens the security posture of your environment. We have our private endpoint that creates a secure private connection between Azure services without sending traffic across to the internet. So we have our activity log. So this shows any activity that has occurred regarding the resource you created. So we have our access control. That's the role-based access control, which was spoken about earlier. So this is about access, assigning roles, giving access to individuals. So for example, I have a contributor role. If I want to view my access, you see that I have a contributor role. So I have access to create whatever I want to create using the subscription. However, I don't have access to assign access to anybody. That is only for the owner. So if you give somebody an owner role, the person has access to do whatever he or she wants to. But the contributor role grants full access, just like it's written here. It grants full access to manage all resources, but does not allow you to assign roles to Azure RBAC, which is role-based access control, manage assignments in Azure Blueprint, or share image galleries. So I have a contributor role, so I won't be able to add, as you can see, it's grayed out, which is disabled. So you can come here, you can add roles, you can grant anyone you want to give access. This can be on a resource group level, it can be on the resource level. You can assign, give access. Okay, you want this person to have a reader access. You can only view resources and you cannot make any change to the resource. So you can check access, review the level of access a user, group, or service principal or managed identity has to this resource. Okay, so we have the role assignments, roles, deny assignments, classic administrators. So these classic administrators, before this role-based access control came and was deployed by Azure, this was what was in use. Okay, so the next we're going to be looking at is tags. I'll just go through all of this quickly so that not to waste much of our time. So tags, like I mentioned earlier, we can assign tags to resources. It's very important to assign a tag to a resource for identification, and it can also be used for automation. For example, if you're running a script and you want it to identify a particular resource group or a particular resource, and you identify those resources with a particular tag, you can use the tag for automation. Then we have diagnose and solve problems. So this is where, if you have any issue, tell us about the issue to get solutions and support. Don't include personal or confidential information like password. So you can briefly describe your issue here, then you click on go, get a solution. Look at several common problems that you experience. If you have any problem, you can just come here, click on it, and you get your solution. Then resource visualizer. So this is where you see. So this resource visualizer is also one of the importance of having or creating your resources in a resource group. So because we have just our virtual network in that resource group we earlier created, that is why it's only showing here. So we'll go back to settings. You can drop down our settings, which here we have our address space, which was created during our VNet creation. Here you can see our address space. We have connected devices. Here, this also shows us the devices already connected, or the resources already connected to this virtual network. So if we have created a VM and we use this virtual network to create that virtual machine, it automatically shows here. Then for subnets, so this is the subnet we have created. We can come here just like we did. As I mentioned that we can do this in two ways while creating the virtual network, and from here under settings you go to subnets and you can create an additional subnet. So we have question: protect your virtual machine by secure and seamless RDP and SSH connectivity without the need to expose them through public IP address. Okay, we have DDoS, distributed denial of service protection, which is showing disable DDoS, this network protection disable, because we didn't enable it during creation. So we have firewall. All these are for security. No firewall exists in this virtual network. We have our Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So Defender for Cloud continuously monitors the configuration of your virtual networks to identify potential security vulnerabilities, and it recommends actions to mitigate them. So these are security recommendations for this particular resource. We have our Azure Network Manager. So the Network Manager, it offers centralized management of virtual network resources. So it significantly reduces your operational overhead with Azure Virtual Network Manager, a central management service for your virtual network service, or for your virtual network resources rather. So we have automated topology, we have organization level security, we have safe deployment across regions. So we have our DNS. So please note that in Azure, once we create a virtual network, Azure automatically provides your DNS. That's the domain naming system, which translates name into IP addresses. So it automatically provides that for you. But note that it's not only restricted to the DNS Azure provided. We also have a custom DNS, the one you can assign, you can edit to fit your configuration. Then we have the DNS private resolver. Azure DNS private resolver, it enables you to query Azure DNS private zones from an on-premises environment and vice versa without deploying VM-based DNS servers. So we also have private DNS zones. Azure Private DNS provides a reliable, secure DNS service to manage and resolve domain names in a virtual network without the need to add a custom DNS. solution. But if you want to add a custom DNS, you can click on add, and you go to DNS and click on add to create your own DNS. So we have pairings, VNet pairings, which I mentioned earlier. VNet network pairing enables you to seamlessly connect two or more virtual networks in Azure. So the virtual networks appear as one for connectivity purposes. So you pair, just as the name says, VNet pairing, virtual network pairing, you pair two virtual networks in different regions together, and they appear as one. Then we have our service endpoint. So our service endpoint allows resources in a subnet to connect to Azure services using private IPs. So this service endpoint extends your virtual network to Azure services over Azure's backbone. Azure's backbone is like Microsoft's global private network infrastructure. Okay, so we have a private endpoint. So this private endpoint is a network interface that connects you privately and securely to Azure service, giving that service a private IP address inside your virtual network. So it's private and it gives out a private IP address. It's a secure connection. So where we are not seeing anything here is because we have not created any of these endpoints. So we have properties. So what are properties? This is just like the attributes of the resource created: the name, location, resource group, subscription ID, resource geo ID. So we have logs. So what are logs? Just the way you lock your property to prevent access. So we have two kinds of lock. We have the read lock and the delete lock. So if you are creating a read lock for a particular resource, you won't be able to do anything on that resource, whether editing it or deleting it. But if you create a delete lock, you would be able to edit that particular resource, but you won't be able to delete that particular resource. So we'll go over to monitoring. We have alert, we have metrics. So let's go over alert. So getting alert is basically to get notified when important monitoring events happen on your resource. So we have metrics, which are real-time numerical data that measure the performance and health of your Azure resources. We have diagnostic settings. So these diagnostic settings has to do with configurations that sends resource logs and metrics to destinations like log analytics and storage. So we go to logs. So when I talk about logs, it means detailed record of events and activities that occur within Azure resources. And this is basically used for monitoring and troubleshooting. So Azure Monitor Log Analysis, a tool used to produce insights from Azure Monitor logs. So we have our virtual network flow logs. These logs, it captures IP traffic pattern through network security group for analysis and security auditing. So we have our topology. So this topology is a visual map in Azure showing how resources in a virtual network are connected. So if we have more resources connected to this particular virtual network, we are going to see a topology of like a visual map of those resources. Then we go over to automation. We have our CLI and PowerShell. Azure CLI, it's a command line, and we have PS, which is PowerShell. So these command line tools are used to manage and automate Azure resources. So it's a set of commands used to create and manage Azure resources. Okay, let's go over to tasks. Automation task. So this schedules tasks or gets notified of changes and take automation actions. So the tasks just includes like action items or the operations performed. So you have export templates. Here, this is where where we get our ARM template. So what is ARM? Azure Resource Manager. It's a deployment and management service. So here we can see a template, a JSON file that captures a resource configuration for a deployment or automation. So we go over to help. Connection troubleshoot. So Network Watcher connection troubleshoot provides the capability to check a direct TCP or ICMP connection from a virtual machine, application gateway version 2 or version host to a VM, fully qualified domain name, FQDN, URL, or IP address. To start, choose a source to start the connection from and the destination you wish to connect to, and select one that diagnostics test. So here, basically, what are they saying? It's just used to troubleshoot connection issues from maybe virtual machine. If you're having like ping issues, you can troubleshoot the exact issue as to what is happening or what is causing the error to happen. So we have support and troubleshooting. So this is where you log whatever you want, like whatever issues you're experiencing. This is where you log it concerning the VNet or concerning Azure generally. You click on it. If you write your issue, you click on go. The Azure will automatically give you some solutions. But if those solutions, if you're not okay with those solutions, you see a path to contact support or create a request. Then you can go ahead and log your requests, and Microsoft will reach out to you regarding that particular request or inquiry. So this is all we have for you for our virtual network, Azure Virtual Network. So if you have any question or if you have any addition, I would love us to drop it. I and my partner Paul Ogurefo, we're always ready to attend to whatever questions you have or whatever clarity you have. You can drop it and we'll be attending to you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. So I don't know if you have anything to say.
No, not really. Thank you. Right.